Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to Occult Explorers. I'm your hostess, Snappy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Dion. How's it going, Dion?
Life is still good. We're
Life
still
is
here.
good, eh? Yeah, we're surviving, keep trekking on. So today we're going to be looking into Therapia, the sacred theater, and this is continuing, as always, from our previous episode, right? So how does this kind of relate into what we were talking about with the sensorium and all of the kind of various stuff from the previous episode?
Sure. Continuation from the Sacred Grove, the first video, which is a place in nature that's separate from other places where special rituals take place, ceremonies, storytelling. And the concept of theater and even the word theater and therapy are the same roots, along with theoi, which is gods. Um, you
Wow.
know, in ancient times, the theater is storytelling. Like you go into the cave and you have to see those animals painted on the walls, and the old shaman would be telling the stories and the histories. And these are the teaching stories of the tribes. And this goes back to ancient times, oral traditions. This is the roots of theater.
Of
All
course.
mankind, everywhere. And at a certain point, it evolved um, using costumes, dramatic storylines, props, and all that. And so, what we're going to talk about that is in relation to the mystery rite as well. We've been talking about the mystery rites of ancient Christianity, how that meets up with pagan traditions, along with the Greek traditions, Canaanite traditions, and Phoenician traditions, what have you. And so, the roots of Greek theater, we're going to be talking about the ritualistic roots. People say it comes out of Sumer, comes out of Iran, the Persian Empire, Egyptian empires. These older big dynasties had forms of theater as well.
Right. Of course. Well, it makes a lot of sense when you think about it because something like storytelling is so essential to just the human experience. Like I can imagine just our ancient ancestors, telling stories around the fire from time immemorial, right? This is how we teach each other, how we share anything, and then like when I think about the theater in relation to the mysteries, right? I think about the cult of Dionysus, and it's said that the Greek theater comes directly out of this. What do you know about that?
Directly out of rituals. It's a ritualized form. So let's go to our first picture, and
Right.
we'll deconstruct it a little bit.
Ooh, there we go.
Yeah, it's a sundial. Um, we showed that in our previous episodes, how this becomes a threshing floor. And this sundial is let's say this is the stage where it all takes place. Here's where you calculate time to harvest with nature, with plants. And here's where the teaching stories evolve from. If you want to go to the next picture, sundials turn into threshing floors. Here's an older threshing floor. And that's where they would take the wheat after the harvest, and with horses and cows, they would go in a circle around it, and that loosens the chaff, the grains, separates it. And we've also talked about in previous episodes argot and the argoteres and the thieves' language and how the horse's hoof. There's a term that deals with claviceps purpurea, the ergo. And so this is part of the threshing floor technology, the hoofs on the floor, the horseshoe. Let's hit the next picture.
Yeah, I also think about how this is also related to the gymnasium too, and the sacred grove again, right? They're setting up this sacred round special space, and you used to use these also for as wrestling pits and like places of sacrifice. Yeah, just a really powerful image.
And that space in the middle became known as the orchestra. And so in ancient times, when the threshing floor wasn't being used, because remember that the wheat didn't, you don't harvest that every day. It's a seasonal thing. So the rest of the time, the threshing floors were used for the stages for theaters.
Wow.
It was already built. It was in the round. It was there. People already go around there and have rituals so many times a year. So it's already a centralized spot in your local town. where you could have these things. And so during the Hellenic period, they evolved some of the horseshoe shape. That's why I wanted to throw this in, talking about the horseshoe. This is called the horseshoe theater, and that was part of the Hellenized period, you know. And so we're talking about Dionysus and how it evolved from the Dionysic ritual. We'll hit the next picture. You know, since we showed the, yep, you know, so in previous episodes, I just got to throw it in. We talked about Ashkelon, the shape of Ashkelon. We talked about the Agape love beds up in the corner there in the tombs, where they were doing the orgies down in the tombs. The bottom right is Apollonia in North Africa, that shape. And you can see that shape is like a theater.
Yeah.
It's related to this theater shape. Well, you know, we've been talking about these shapes because shapes are important. There's different forms of language. Some languages are spoken with words. Some languages are spoken with sound. Some languages are in images.
Yeah, and we know that the Greeks were really heavily invested in geometry. Like they were heavily designing all of these spaces, and geometrical patterns and shapes are associated with all of the various deities, you know? Like Athena is an equilateral triangle, for example.
Oh yeah. So we'll hit the next picture, and now we're gonna so here's where we merge past with the sacred shape and with Dionysic rituals. And this is the sacred theater of Dionysus. And you'll see even in the middle part right there, they got a chair or a series of chairs that are sectioned apart for the main priest of Dionysus. That's central to the ritual. They had a throne in the middle, an altar where they would sacrifice a goat. So basically, you had your Dionysic festivals that took place. What's that? 2500 BC, if I'm correct in the time frame, somewhere around there to 3500. The original festivals, and this is where they would learn the myths of Dionysus and drinking wine, and they would go through all these different rituals and get high, have orgies up in the mountains. There's famous for the Bacchantes and the Maenads. They would tear apart animals or people. So it's very, very wild. You know, we're not even really going to talk about all that. I'm sure you've heard about all that before. And there's so many other videos talking about the Dionysic rituals. But what happens is later on, it becomes part of theater because these rituals don't go away. In Athens is where they found something called the city of Dionysia. And this is dealing with poems and plays, in music and art. And it was a competition, a 6-day competition where people would come together and do poetry and theater, evolved out of these theaters, you know, these sacred shapes. And it was a competition. And so the best poet would win. You would win a goat. That was the prize. You've heard of becoming the goat, like when you're the goat. You know,
you're the greatest.
Yeah, you're the greatest. And they would, like I said, sacrifice a goat at the beginning. And that's part of what the type of material they're performing. So back then, there was only 2 different kinds of plays, or let's say 3. And the first one is called a tragedy, you know, and it's based on things that we see in life, you know, the dramas of life, love and death, loss, you know.
So the heart of like Greek tragedy, the way I always think about it is they would take the most culturally horrific ideas, you know, or like things that were the most taboo, and they would put them on display, you know.
Yeah.
So the most famous one is Oedipus Rex, right? Who winds up falling in love with and marrying and with his mother, you know, in a case of poetic tragedy, you know.
Oh yeah. And you know the thing with the word tragedy, it means goat song. Tragos, tragi, and dia. It's a goat song, and deals with the satires, and it deals with Dionysic rituals. The goats are there and present, and so they would sing these. It first started with dithyrambs, a form of song that they would sing.
Yeah, they're like hymns, or I've heard them also related to mantras or to Sufi zikrs, you know. So
yeah, and they would circle around the orchestra, the circle in the middle, and go into a trance, and you know. But around 600 BC, things changed, and that's when they founded the festival. they banned women from theater. And at
Oh,
that point, all the men or all the women were played by male actors in masks. And that's where the mask was evolved into theater at this time. And part of the mask, it would help project the voice as well. And it started originally with one actor, and he would change masks. And then eventually they said, well, we can add a couple actors until when they had 3 actors, even that was considered like, whoa, slow down. We already have 3 actors on stage. And to make that possible, if you see at the bottom of the picture there, that square, it's a skene. That was your scene house. And that's where they go back there and change outfits and masks. It's backstage of your theater. What's funny about the skene, it reminds me of the Skene's glands. You know what the Skene's glands is?
yeah. That's within the female anatomy.
Yeah, sure. And that deals with ejaculation. Because we talk about these body fluids in our other episodes. I'm going to have to mention it if I see the word on the screen there. And so we know that it's called biotransformation. That's where you could take an herb, a plant, and through your urine, it can be transformed into a bioactive substance, say like DMT. In the case of shamans in Siberia who ingest urine, and then when it's passed through their urine, it's now bioavailable. The DMT is available.
The muscle with them,
Yeah, you're right. It's not DMT. I got to make sure I don't say DMT. It's muscle.
Yeah, muscle.
Makes your mind do other things too. A lot of times I just say DMT to classify all of it, all the things that you elucidate on. So we know that urine, male or female, can biotransform plants and make them bioavailable, psychoactive. Well, with the woman's anatomy, they have a Skene's gland. When there's arousal and an orgasm, you've heard of female ejaculation. And they've done tests to find out that the female ejaculate originally starts off as urine, and then it gets processed with extra chemicals, a PSA, prostate-specific antigen, a PHP. There's sugars and salts that get put in there. So imagine you're already biotransforming these psychoactive substances, and then you add even another alchemical transformation on top of it with the Skene's gland. And the skene, it deals with the word like skiff, like a skiff in water, or a scalpel to cut, to part the ways. That's where the root of it is in skiff, the roots of it in Greek. And it's before, part of it was dividing the circle, because there they got a full circle, but that house was put to cut off the circle, because they changed shapes of these amphitheaters. The amphitheaters were in a full round at a certain point, and they were a semicircle. And then the Romans finally came with the word amphitheater.
Mm-hmm.
But originally the Greeks built their amphitheaters in ravines. And they used the natural geography to utilize the shapes, where later on Roman theaters were just built by themselves, and separate. So let's go to the next picture. And so we're talking about the city Dionysia, and that's what replaced your Dionysic rites. Was a once a year, 6-day festival throughout Greece, and Athens was the starting point of it. There was a competition, best playwright. In these plays, these theatrical performances involved ancient rituals along with political commentary. And that's what sometimes would get these poets in trouble, because they would try to subliminally throw in jabs at whoever's the leader or king or queen at that time. And, they'd get them in trouble.
No, we know, like, famously, I know Aristophanes got in trouble for some of his comedies where he was poking fun at politicians. He also got in trouble for revealing too much of the mysteries in a couple of his plays as well. So, and this could potentially get you flogged or exiled or even killed.
Oh, yeah. Well, like I said, there were sacrifices at these at the festival at the city Dionysia, because imagine the Dionysic rites are still going on, but underground. you know, up on the hill, they're doing things at the, all over, they're doing things. The rich people have their own parties they're doing because they would get totally high. Like it was encouraged that you're almost staggering and passing out. And then you recover the next day. And like I said, the plays were tragedies, goat songs, but they had something they added to it later, which was called comedies. And that was to relieve the stress. Because, these tragedies are a cathartic release. You see people losing their lives, mothers losing daughters, and everything's about loss or the drama of life.
This is a really important part because within the Dionysic rituals, they're doing all of this horrific kind of stuff, which a lot of other channels get into, where I'm not going to get into. But the key to all of that is this idea of the experience of the all, right? Of embracing that panic, of meeting Pan, becoming one with everything. And through that, it's this life-affirming experience. It reaffirms you in your quest. You die and are reborn anew. And what I see with tragedy, and a lot of people have talked about this, is that it mirrors that same experience. The idea is by putting on these horrific events on display, through this process of purification and catharsis, we face our fears and we can process them and handle them. It's like that idea of you watch someone jump off a cliff, you can now do it yourself, just by seeing someone go through it and survive, So by watching these horrific events on display, it makes them more palatable. It makes it understandable. And it allows us to face these fears. And comedy does much the same thing, because comedy embraces the absurdity of life, right? And it focuses on these things that don't make sense, that we have no control over, and it tells us to laugh at them, So again, it reaffirms things and it takes away the power of all of this insanity of life and the tragedies of life, right?
Oh, yeah, because they needed comedy. They had to introduce comedy after the tragedy. So they have a couple days of tragedy, and then you get comedies to relieve it. And,
Right.
In between, the whole city's going crazy. The whole city, everyone this is like going to Woodstock or going to your Coachella, your Lollapalooza. This is going to your World's Fair. Like everything's there. And like I said, the inebriation was encouraged because it's Dionysic. And they were not only drinking the wines, they had goat milks. Goat milk was part of it. Psychoactive goat milks. Little cakes, little psychoactive cakes, fumigation, with the hemp, with the cannabis, with the poppies, the opium. People were getting toasted, completely toasted. The whole city was toasted. It was recreating the Dionysic rites in a PC woke modern way, almost, you could say. Like, we're looking back and saying how crazy it is, but to them, it was very sanitized compared to the real Dionysic rituals.
Right. When we were talking to Ammon about this privately the other day, he was mentioning how this became eventually, like, this was a way to incorporate the Dionysic rites into the city, right? And to use them as a way to revitalize and to keep the city kind of as like a communal whole, right? And it's this whole idea of creating this community health and this community healing. It was really about, like you're saying, in one sense, it's a sanitization. It's taking the most extreme aspects of the mystery and reducing them. But it's also incorporating them into the daily life of the city, and of this yearly cycle of the city, so that it can be reborn, can die and be reborn. So it too can heal itself.
It's ironic. They didn't even do the sacrificing on stage.
Oh.
Like, it would take place off a stage, like in the theater performances. So, like, say, where Medea, like, if the kids get poisoned, or where you talked about where the son kills his father, or all that would be backstage, would happen. And then a messenger would come, an actor, and say, yes, we have heard that somebody has died. Because they did it, they sanitized the violence that you didn't even see it.
Oh, wow.
But they didn't sanitize the sexuality, though. See, now, in between the tragedies and the comedies, you had something that were called satire plays. And that's where they had these satires, and that's where they'd have weirdest characters that would be drawn from the people, and they would dress them in the weirdest outfits with large leather dildos strap-ons that they'd be wearing, and they would just do insane comedy, goat comedy, and they would do that in between the acts as they were, to lower the levity,
Right. This
to
is such like a huge thing with Greek culture, because you see this kind of like ridiculousness about the genitalia everywhere. Like they have those statues with the giant penises that are in people's gardens. You have the Herms, which are these giant phalluses with Hermes' face in the middle of them. You have the god Priapus, who's just got an enormously massive, kind of comically large phallus. Right.
right.
And then the goats and the satyrs themselves, right? And all of these hairy men who are like, this is kind of an ongoing ridiculous theme.
If you could hit the next picture.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wow.
There's those satyrs. And they would carry something phalloi through the streets. So when they would start off City Dionysia parade at the beginning of the 6-day ritual, they'd carry a giant penis through the street, of phallois, these giant penises. It was a wild times, very wild times. Like eventually it was banned.
Yeah.
Justinian, was one of the people that bans that stuff later on. He's like, nah, like,
oh, Christian Puritan Justinian. Ugh.
Yeah, that the final straw. I mean, and they had already got rid of certain elements like especially first AD too. Around first AD, a lot of stuff took place, but then the Romans revived the theater at that point. But once they converted to Christianity, that's when they're like, we got to squash this.
One thing I find that's really interesting, just thinking about this, is like, if we compare our culture to their culture, right? They're all about the sex. The sex is not taboo, but the violence, that's taboo. We still want to address the violence, but the violence itself, we don't want to show, And then we've kind of had this flipping. Like in our modern culture, we're like all about the violence. Let's rub our noses in it, but you show like half a side boob and people have a heart attack, right?
Right. Yeah. So City of Dionysia, it was a wild time because it's your Dionysic festival in the polis. It's now a government sanctioned competition. It employed people that were sponsors. Like if you're lucky, you could join one of these theater groups, being a poor villager, because the rich people would be patrons, of Athens, and they would sponsor theater groups to compete. That was the fun of it. And they also did something, the pharmakos, which was, I talked about a sacrifice. They sacrificed a goat. But in Athens, they did have a ritual where they sacrificed slaves, and they would treat them as a king for a day, then sacrifice them. And they were called the pharmakos, which is like, and that word means medicine too. So it's weird. It's pretty weird. We're going to talk about that more later. We'll get into it in the later part of the episode, but let's hit the next picture. Yeah, that's one of those, I think it's a rhyton, they call it. This is a drinking vessel for the goat songs, for the tragedies.
Interesting.
They would drink wine or milk out of this, psychoactive milks. Because, goats will process different things. They love to eat any herb, and you could take their milk. And that was part of it. They would do, the ceremony, they would do 3 libations of milk and 1 libation of wine, the spiced wines.
Right. And we know that they're using psilocybin and cannabis, and both of those could be processed in the milk easily. And we know in India they make a lot of cow milk infused with cannabis. It's a very common thing.
Bog lassi. Exactly. Yeah, those are good.
Either you drink it as a tea or a lassi, or sometimes they have it as these little soft kind of sweet cakes. Yeah, good stuff.
Well, and you said something interesting right there, and that's the word cakes, because they would make cakes for this festival.
Oh?
Yeah, because they would make cakes at a different part of the year there for the Eleusinian rites, and that's with the little cakes and barley, but they used the sacraments year round. Because they used wine during the Eleusinian, during those rituals too, they used wine. So they would mix all these sacraments, and that's the tragedy right there. That's where it comes from. It's goat songs.
Wow.
So yeah, let's hit the next picture.
Ooh, that's pretty scary.
Yeah, those masks. And I think these actually might be some female actors in modern times. But like I said, starting at 600 BC, women were banned from performing in the theater. And so it took a good actor to be able to play an old man, a young woman, all these different characters, and to project that in an amphitheater to thousands of people.
Yeah. I also the masks stand out to me so much because when I know you've also studied some African religions, and when you look at the mask, it becomes so central to a lot of these various cults. And when the shaman puts on the masks are related to different spirits, and a possession actually takes place. Like donning that costume, you become that deity. You embody that character, and they have like very specific divine forms that get used over and over again in various rituals. And then you also see this later in Roman theater with things like the Commedia dell'arte, right? With those very specific character masks. Like there's that old man, there's the guy with the long nose. I can't remember all of them, but it gets so wild.
Yeah, most definitely. And part of it too is part of the possession. You had to change your body gestures or your body language. Because mind you, you're one actor in an auditorium of 2,000 to 20,000 humans.
Wow.
Sneezing and farting and talking and whispering and everyone's trying to hear one person's voice. And so a lot of it wasn't voice. It was body language, movements. Here we see some movements. You see some arms in the air. You see, those gestures. People are reaching out to something. Gestures was a big part of it. That it's a part of we talk about the different sensations in the last video. Body language is part of the senses.
Right. It's important that, like, we know for sure that people are doing a lot of these ecstatic body postures, right? So, like, where they're holding and they're contorting themselves in these ritual poses, and it's thought that these particular poses will help them invoke these deities. So it would make sense that you would see these similar things being brought into the theater. We know, like, they're dancing to invoke the deity. They're holding the pose to invoke the deity. So why not just incorporate both of those into some kind of motion, right? Makes sense.
Oh yeah. There was tons of dancing and singing going on. In between, during, they had the choruses up in the front with the musicians where they play the lyres and different pan pipes, playing all the different things. So let's hit the next picture. And so think about its senses. The last video was about senses we did last week. Well, the theaters where you now take all the senses and put them into play, because that's what you go to the theater for, is to have your senses stimulated. And so the theater, the design of the physical structure, the repetition of the words by the actors, the lighting, the smells, everything is designed to play on your senses to have you get a cathartic release. And part of that is this right here. Deus e machina.
Yeah, Deus machina, God in the machine.
Yes.
Those of you who are familiar with film tropes should know about this one.
And it was a famous cartoon. They made a manga out of it.
Right.
Back in the day. And what that was God appearing on a machine. It was a dramatic device. Imagine at a moment in the theater, in the play, and God comes over the skiing house. And it started with just a regular crane. That was the first prop, was just a regular crane. And people would go wild over it. It was like a climatic part of the play.
I always think of the ending of Euripides' Medea, where she takes off in her golden chariot pulled by her dragon, right? Like, that's a pretty epic God in the machine escape.
Well, what's funny, I think, is that you said Astrophanes?
Aristophanes, yeah.
Aristophanes, yeah. I pronounce everything wrong, folks.
No worries.
Aristophanes makes fun of Euripides in one of his plays, he has Euripides come out on the machine himself during the middle of his play to make fun of, because at a certain point they said that Euripides would use it in every play,
Right.
and everybody started using it. So say his
Very
name
true.
again.
Aristophanes.
Aristophanes makes fun of him. Like, all right, I'm going to have you coming out on your own machine as he's speaking, and the whole audience going crazy over it. And part of these theater performances, the playwright, the author, could come out at a certain point, like during the intermission, and he could talk about things. And sometimes it could be about the play, like what you're expecting to see, but other times he could say whatever he wants.
Right.
So it's like, imagine you go to see one of your favorite Broadway plays, and then the playwright comes out in the middle of the intermission and starts talking about politics. Starts talking about crazy stuff. That would be totally crazy. We couldn't have that nowadays. But then they did that. You got to know, theater was everything back in the day. This is where you went to get high, where you went to get laid. You went to talk about plotting to overthrow the government. It all took place here. This is where it took place. You came, the villages once a year would come into the big city and get high and watch theater performances.
Yeah. I'm just keep thinking about Aristophanes now and Euripides since you brought it up. And one of the plays I read recently was Frogs. And one of the whole point, so the whole point of that play is Euripides has died like a year prior. And, Greece as always is in the middle of some kind of war. So Aristophanes creates this play where Dionysus is going to go to the underworld and bring back Euripides in order to write an amazing tragedy to reinvigorate the people of Athens in the midst of their war. But the big joke is, by the end of the play, Bacchus Dionysus does not resurrect Euripides. In fact, condemns him to be second best for all eternity and brings back Aeschylus in his stead,
Yep, went there to get Euripides and says, nah, you know what?
Right, and he doesn't even tell you kind of why he does so. He just does it on a flippin' whim because he's Dionysus,
So
just like, you'll always be second best. Sorry, bye.
Right. Oh yeah. So here they got machines. These machines, they become your modern times in theater. You see the things in theater, like the curtains and all that stuff evolves out of this.
Right.
It evolves out of them trying to convey the story of Dionysus.
Amazing.
And it took all these props. Oh, there you go. And that's at Syracuse.
What's going on here? Is that water?
Yep, that's water. So at a certain point, some genius got the idea, hey, let's flood these. And then they would put nymphs in there, naked young women and men as mermaids. Y'all love mermaids out there.
Yeah.
Floating around, with the audience screaming all high as a kite, with naked merfish.
Well, mermaids are central to the mysteries, right? They live in the deep, dark oceans and cause reincarnation. So, come on.
Oh, yeah. So at a certain point, Rome, they take over the theater game. They revive it. And let's hit the next picture. And I'll show you this is the floor of the Colosseum right there.
Oh, wow.
That's in Rome. So you can see
Emin was
like
talking about this. Emin was mentioning that, he said that the Colosseum and the gladiatorial fights, they wind up fulfilling largely the same function, except it becomes more fixated on the sacrifice and on the spectacle and on the capital, on generating wealth.
Oh, yeah. This was giant. This is like going to your rock concert back in the day. Everyone's there, and they had a violent cathartic release. We'll hit the next picture, and you can see
they're not really. They're associated. They're in the same cult, but it's not Dionysus anymore. By the Roman time, now it's associated with Saturn, right?
And there you could see a recreation. They would flood it, and they would have naval battles, epic naval battles.
Wow!
People in the audience are screaming, going crazy, drunk, throwing things, fighting. People in the water, they're having real battles. Some
Jesus.
people really would die. Like, as
Taking
I'm saying,
combat sports to like it's absolute insanity. Like,
this is
what
next
is this?
level right here. I don't know if you watch those TV shows, American Ninja or whatever, these things they compete. No, go on this show right here, American Gladiator.
You'd
Look
be
at
lucky
this
to
right
make it
here.
out alive.
Well, if you made it out alive, this is where you would have to go right here. And
Oh,
that's Asclepius. Since you clicked onto Asclepius, we're gonna have to switch over to Asclepius there.
oh, sorry. We can go back. I
No,
didn't mean
no,
to.
no, no. We're there.
Okay.
We're there. That temple on the right was in Athens, down the street from the Dionysic theater. And
Oh,
there's a reason why, because that's what the title of the video is today, was Therapia. Therapy as a theater. And what it means is, it means a meeting, a commune, a curing, a healing, a group of people coming together to be healed is a theatrical performance. That's what it's, and so much so that Asclepius, they would do sacrifices to him on the first day of the Dionysia. The day before, even starting the day before, it was Asclepius's day. And wherever the theaters are, you're going to have his little temple next to it, the healing temple. And it's connected to theater in a lot of different ways.
wow.
Yeah, oh yeah, it gets really deep with the healing aspects. And it's the people coming together. It's like you said, it's communal healing. That's what the giant theater is. And so he's the wizard of healing with the snakes and different elements. Let's hit the next picture. And so this is a recreation of the pharmacos, the pharmacal or pharmacon.
Sacrifice, right?
Sacrifice. But that same word is pharmacy or remedy, or can mean a healing remedy, or it can mean a sacrifice. And they were doing that at the beginning of the city Dionysia. And that's
Right.
also a word that's used in the healing jargon.
Yeah, I think of the word pharmacon, which can both be a poison or healing potion. So like, yeah.
Or a sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
Or a human or a goat sacrifice. And that was part of it. Asclepius had some wild healing methods with snakes, using sacrifices. But how is this connected theater is that when you would go to Asclepius, he would tell you to write a song or write a poem. Galen talks about that. That was one of the techniques of Asclepius, was that you had to use poetry, and you would write down your affliction or make it into a song. And if you got healed, you would perform it.
That's amazing.
And part of the way he would do his healings, he would tell you stories. Like say I'm treating like a skin condition, then we might start with the story about skin. Well, there was a god who hurt his skin, and then that's part of the myth. Our teaching is the healing itself, as well as giving him the medicine. You got to tell him the myth about the medicine at the same time. It's not just telling him like, hey, take this medicine from this god. Why? This is what the god did to earn that medicine or create that medicine, and this is why it's helping you. And I want you to think about this and write a poem about this, about why you're getting healed. It's taking the healing into a creative direction where the patient is also a playwright in their own health. You're writing the ending of your health. You're writing into the script, I want to be well. I want to be healed.
Wow.
It's part of the sacred theater of it. And he did use music and sound. Part of it's called the pharmaca, with the A at the end. And these are healing songs, or chants that they would sing over the patients. And let's go to the next picture. Now, this right there is the theater of the Asclepion. That's
Wow.
where he had his healing university that people would go to.
It looks exactly like the threshing floor again, right?
Yeah.
with that altar thing, and it also mirrors the theater we just saw, except without this the skiing in the back.
You're right. Well, the skiing's been torn down. The foundation's still there.
Mm.
Now this theater right here is the most intact of all Greek theaters in the world, and it's acoustically designed so special that there's been at least 10 different studies of the theater to test the sounds, the way the sound conducts, the transduction of the sound. A person sitting in the very back can hear the voices at the bottom talking. It amplifies. That's why it's called the amphitheater. It amplifies the sound, especially high frequencies, so you don't hear muddled stuff.
Amazing.
And it's based off of, we call it sacred geometry, Pythagorean stuff. There was a pentagram on the floor there originally. The lines
Wow.
connect into a pentagram. Everything connects. And
Venus the morning star.
yeah. And they would put the patient in the middle of the amphitheater, and they would chant over the patient. You hear what I said? Right there in the middle would be the sick person. And the doctors along the side would be chanting in different pitches and rhythms, amplifying and healing the person through sound.
You know what?
That was part of the techniques.
You're saying this, and on one hand, it sounds this beautiful and amazing, but on the other hand, I am getting this satanic imagery, right, of people in black hoods with a person in the middle of a pentagram, all chanting. Christians have ruined it.
It's not that,
No, it's just funny.
But in this theater right here, people still go to it to this day to study it. They've done tests where they drop a pin, needle, and they have microphones in the back to test it. And if you talk at 60 decibels, which is the normal human voice, it can be heard in the back rows.
Still to this day.
And the thing is, wow, when you wear those masks that you were showing, those Greek masks,
yeah,
they had special sound apertures on the mask. Like you could, how you curve, it creates like a speaker effect. So the mask would amplify the actor's sound. So you have the shape of the theater, the actor's mask, and as well as having an actor that has a strong voice that can project, speaking from your diaphragm. And they would get things done. And this is Epidaurus, the Asclepion at Epidaurus, the main healing center where they would go study these ancient healing arts. And a lot of it was based off of sound in theater. And they said towards the end, Asclepius started wearing theater clothing.
Oh?
Yeah. When he was kind of like his own soter. He was a soter. He's a form of a Jesus himself. Some people will say he's a healing god. Let's hit the next picture.
Well, a lot of people do connect like the later cult of Jesus to the cult of Asclepius, right?
Oh, yeah. And, part of this place it was on ley lines right there. Telluric currents are at that spot. So Asclepius knew how to heal in different ways, as well with snakes too. He was using snakes and different herbs. And
yeah, Evan was telling us about how he would take the snakes, right, and they'd put people to sleep in these beds, and then the snakes would like crawl all over them.
Let's talk about that. All right. So can you read that phrase there at the bottom?
Yeah. So it says onirogen, from the Greek oniros, meaning dream, and gen, to create, is a substance or other stimulus which produces or enhances dreamlike states of consciousness.
Yeah. And so when you went there to get healed, he had multiple processes. You might put you in the amphitheater where they would sing towards you. He might teach you different sounds, songs, have you write poetry and perform. Now we're going to get into the next concept. It's called dream theater. Dream theater, the theater of the mind, of the dream, where this performance takes place. And the place he would put you is called the dormitory. And that's dormer, to dorm, you're sleeping. That's what a dormitory is, to sleep. And he had these sleep centers. And he put you in there, and he knew how to give you things to knock you out. Some valerian roots, henbanes, scopolines, nightshades. what have you, would just knock you out, knock you to sleep. And then you would dream, and you'd be in a theatrical performance, and then they'd interpret it in the morning. And there were snakes, the snakes that he would have bite you, those were kept separately than the snakes in the dormitory. The snakes in the dormitory were all non-poisonous snakes.
Mm.
And they would slither around at night all over everybody. And, that was part of the healing.
Yeah, and I have read that some people speculate that it could be something to do with the natural bacteria and germs that exist upon the snakes actually helping and healing people.
Yeah, I think you guys were talking about that last night.
Yeah.
They're talking about even how you put a kid goat in a pen with the calves, and it pees all over them. But that, for some reason, builds their immunity.
Yeah. There's a lot of this weird stuff going on with a lot of this germ, building up strength and building up immunities to germs. And we know that the ancients didn't understand it in the way that we do, but they knew what worked,
Right. So if you went to the Asclepion in ancient times, he would turn you into an actor.
Right.
A hypocrite. And the word is hypocrite.
Really?
Yeah, that's the word for actor. And you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath?
Yeah.
That doctors take.
You swear not to cause any harm, right?
Yeah. And his healing methods, like I said, first thing you had to do was write a poem or a play. Then they put you in the dream theater. And then you have to they would interpret the dreams in a poetic fashion. And then they put you in the theater itself and perform onto you. It was very theatrical.
That's so awesome. I just wanted to share just one thing that one of our users here commented. So Miles Kiriki just said, mask with sound amplification is called later in Etruscan and Latin persona, for sound, hence persona, and even person in modern language. I just thought that was really cool. Thanks for sharing, Miles.
Oh, yeah. That is awesome. Yeah, those masks are special. And like I said, you were saying they do get possessed. And sometimes people didn't know who the actors were. So you had a certain immunity to say things underneath that mask. No one knew who you were after the mask was off. So you could get away with things.
Oh, yeah. And I know, in a lot of these more shamanistic cultures, they treat the mask as the deity. So when the mask is not on the actor or on the shaman, it is in the shrine in the place of where the deity would be. And it's treated as an idol, And then when you put it on, you are becoming the god, and you are treated as the god while you're wearing it,
In the mask itself, when it's sitting there, they'll feed it. It's still hungry. It's thirsty. It's got to eat. They'll put some smoke onto it, blow some smoke if it's,
Right? Yeah, well, people always wanted to do this with their deities. Deities want the things that we want. They want drugs, they want light, they want good smelling incense, they want water.
And part of the theater experience was the fumigation.
Right.
It was the heavy smells, we're not seeing it. We just see it as a normal theater performance where we go and we sit there. But in ancient times, this was special. You're a little kid from the village or whoever you are, this is a once a year thing. Normally you're a farmer out in the middle of nowhere, and now you're going into a big city with naked people, all kinds of wild drinking and drugs, and the big city. People ride chariots and horses, and you walk. You had to walk 50 miles to get there.
Wow.
But, depending on your income level, because at the amphitheaters, they had sections for poor people. That was in the back. And the section in the front for the rich people. And then for the chorus, because sometimes they would have the chorus saying the lines. Because imagine everyone can't hear. So the actor is miming it through gestures, and the chorus, 20 people deep, are saying his line for him. And he's just pretending to say it. What lip syncing? Is that what we call lip syncing? And then you'd have the priest of Dionysus in the middle, and then you had the priest of Asclepius and the priest and the muses, all right there. So that Asclepius was part of the theater performance because he sat next to Dionysus. the head priest of Dionysus.
That's so cool. And there's so much interesting stuff going on with the chorus too in the theater. And like with the, I know because in most of the tragedies, the chorus kind of echoes and supports the deity or kind of tells you what's going to happen next or kind of tells you what to think and whatnot. One of the more interesting things when I was reading Frogs is that half the time the chorus is being antagonistic to Dionysus and it's making fun of him. And you're just like, what is going on here? Right? Like when you read the Bacchae by Euripides, everyone is like bending over backwards to kiss Dionysus's butt. But then in the Frogs, nope, they're about to beat him to death.
No, and that's why the later plays they started adding different. It started off with one person changing mass into 2 or 3 people, into a bunch of people, and so finally they started adding in plot twists and mistaken identities, and that's where you get into misdirection. That's only later where you get those aha moments, like what? Like in the original versions, you know what's going to happen. It's just inevitable, and it's about the raw nature of life. Like you have to lose your wife, you have to lose your husband. Like everything's bad. Like,
yeah.
But in the later
really
versions, you think you got everything, and then it twists on you. Like somebody reveals something, and it's like,
yeah,
Scooby,
amazing, wow.
And that's what life is. Life mirrors our theater mirrors life, if it's real theater.
Yeah, and I mean, it also connects to like the epic poetry too, right? Like I keep thinking about how they're also performing Homer, and they're using Homer as like to identify themselves, and they're using all of his stories as a way, or these cultural stories as a way to kind of organize and understand their life. And then later on, the Greeks mirror that. You get Virgil, who kind of puts his own spin on it with the Aeneid, really interesting stuff. All of this poetry also connects,
Yeah. So, at this point, we're going to have to throw them. I'm going to have to put a little biblical quotes in there.
Always.
And body fluids. And
we are the Occult Explorers.
You better be careful. You better be careful if you click on this channel. So we'll hit the next picture. All right. Maybe you could read that for me. That's from Samuel.
Yeah. So he says, he changed his taste and feigned madness. In their hands he acted like a madman, drumming on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Samuel 21.
That's David.
Ooh.
What happens is David realizes that this powerful king is going to take him out. So he has to act. And they say, and it even says there, he acted like a madman. And where it says he changed his taste, what's taste means his countenance, his appearance, his sanity. We talked about taste in the past video we did about senses, and how taste can mean to perceive or to know.
Yeah.
He changed his taste. That's what it says in one of these ancient. You got to flip through the different versions. You have King James and the Septuagint and the OJB, and you have so many different versions. And in one, I found one where it says he changed his taste, and it's an allusion to his mental state. And he had to act, and he's an actor. It looks like he's acting just fine, and he's letting spittle come down, acting all crazy. And he said he was drumming on the doors, doing hand signs and drumming on the doors.
That all sounds shamanistic to me, right? Like you're going into some kind of frenzy, you're drumming. What? Like, interesting.
Yeah, and they let him go. And in the next line, it would say that the king's like, "Why'd you bring this mad dude to me? Get him out of here." And it works. And he escapes to go on to be the big bad boss man. But
cool.
He sure knows how to act right there. That's an acting. It says he acted and changed his taste.
He acted so well they believed it, right?
Yeah. And they know about acting in the relationships to the mystery rite in the Bible. We'll hit one more picture. And there's that word, hypocrites. That means to be an actor or a pretender. And it's used 17 times in the New Testament. And it's a loan word, like Sanhedrin and synagogue. Hypocrites is a Greek word that was borrowed. And so they know what it is. They know it's a borrowed word when they read it. And it's about actors. It deals with acting. And here you have Jesus right here giving a performance, and the boat on the stage, though the boat's not in water. And he's performing for his people, a theatrical performance.
Right.
As a hypocrite.
And I noticed his hand is kind of doing this, right? This is a very famous gesture. You see this in the Sabbathean mysteries. It's also like they call it the Benedicto Latino, I believe. Anyway, yeah, interesting.
Yeah, hand signs, gestures are part of the theatrical performance of an actor. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it's used 17 times, and it means actor. It's a loan word. They didn't use the Hebrew word for actor. They used the loan word, the borrowed word. Because there was theaters back then. And there's even a story with Paul. You know, we talked about last week, Thecla and St. Minas and the little sanctity jars that had the holy scents in them.
Right.
You know, and she's brought into a stadium as well. When we talked about, remember, the lioness protects her. That's in a stadium. There's a few references to theaters and stadiums back then. Because in one, Paul doesn't want to go in it. He's like, nah, I'm not going in there, because they want to get him. And they're in there cheering. And they're in the stadium cheering Diana of Artemis, of Ephesus is great. Diana of Ephesus is great. And it says they chanted for 2 hours straight. Just over and over, 20,000 people.
It's so wild that you bring this up, because everyone should go and watch. Neil just did this awesome video with this professor, Dr. Carla Ioescu, I think is her name, where she talks about this, and she writes all about this, where she connects Artemis of Ephesus with the Virgin Mary, and basically is arguing that they're synonymous.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, watch our video last time, or the one before, right. Aphrodite Urania. Mary Aphrodite Urania.
Yeah, we've been noticing this, but also other people have been noticing this too, right? We're not pulling out of nowhere.
Yeah, I may be a hypocrite, but
right,
just
it's interesting. This idea of being a hypocrite is to be an actor, is to be a pretender. So when you said it's used 13 times,
no, 17 times in the New Testament as a loan word, meaning like
as a loan word. So like, when is it occurring? How are they using it?
In different phrases, like when they're talking about you're being a hypocrite or you're being an actor, like, like it's in references. Sometimes like priests are doing things and you're acting holy in front of the people, being a hypocrite, but it means you're being an actor.
Interesting. Where you're having that kind of two-sided dual nature. That's very Dionysian as well to me, There's this whole thing with the cult of Dionysus in theater, and this idea of antiprasis, where you say one thing but mean another. And it's usually the way that it's distinguished is by extremes. So the person is saying something really extremely evil, maybe it's supposed to be inverted for comic relief or something, Yeah. But there's all this secret language that happens with the theater too,
Well, imagine if you go to your modern church, it's a theatrical performance.
Right.
It goes through, you have songs, you sing, there's a whole cathartic release. You learn a lesson, you cry, and then let's sing again at the end and take you home and get you home, And there's different types of songs. The song at the beginning is different than the song at the end. It's the thematic of it. The themes are different. The songs at the beginning are happy, inviting songs. You're coming in, you're walking in. It's like, come in, we're happy.
Right. And then by the end, you're on your knees crying your eyes out, right?
Especially make you feel guilty. And then they pass around the basket and get the money. And they sing you a going home song. Like, I'm going home, I'm good. It's over. I'm happy. Like, let's go. It's a theatrical performance. They knew it,
And even the less traditional ones, right?
It's the best preachers everyone knows got all the bombast, and they're just pulling stuff out of their rears and being like just intense and connecting dots where they don't. I will never forget. I one time, one of these pastors, when I was still a Christian, went on this whole big speech that borderline rant about how Jesus was like Alexander the Great, and I was just like, what?
Yep, yep. Well, imagine, in ancient times, well, not in ancient times, in the 50s in America here, there was something called these tent revivals. And you may not know about that. I don't know if they had those in Canada, but they would set up these big tents and they'd have food and music, and that's what the church revival was. That's where they get their playing with those snakes. And it was a theater. They were these traveling congregations that would set up these big tents up out in the middle of a field, and you would go there.
This was such a huge thing in early American history. I remember reading about this. You have a whole profession of these traveling preachers who would go to these communities and set up circus tents and sell snake oil and put people through rites and stuff, even do drug-induced mystery rites, because we know this for sure because Joseph Smith did it,
Yeah. And that's the Dionysic theater.
Right.
Turned into a tent theaters, tent revival in America. We'll talk about that next time.
And snake.
So if you liked anything you heard, like and subscribe, comments. We love comments. Like the guy's comment earlier was awesome.
Yeah, exactly. Please share with us if you have any information, come and tell us. We're just explorers. We want to learn from you as much as we want to share with you. And also make sure you come in tomorrow for the Witches Symposium, where we'll be joined by our good friends Neil from Gnostic Informant and Ammon from Lady Babylon, as well as our pal Wretch. And we'll be breaking down the theater and what we discussed here even more in depth. So it's going to be a lot of fun, guys. So thank you all for tuning in. And any last words, Dion?
Oh, stay blessed. Keep your heads up.
Yeah. Stay blessed. And, as always, peace and love, and hail Satan. Take care, everyone.